Konnichiwa, and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks. My name is Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. On this edition of Ralph Reads, I will continue this miniseries, Whoreson, written by the best-selling black author and Mr. Donald Goines. Here we go, yo. Let the reading commence. Chapter 18. With the passing of Christmas, my year was coming up. Parole board had given flop, but that didn't make any difference. I now had 4 months to go for discharge. Tony had come up to visit me twice in the past year, but each time he came, I had refused to go to the visiting room. In my mind, I knew there was nothing he could tell me. He had my woman, and that was that. I had left my jewelry and all my clothes for him when I'd gone into prison. That hadn't been enough. He had taken my woman. I didn't want the bitch back. If anything, I wanted to kill her. She could have chose any other than my only friend. I was not the only one who was mad at them. Big Mama, before she died, had barred Boots from her trick house. And some of my old friends who had just left the streets told me she wouldn't have anything to do with Tony since he'd copped Boots. After Big Mama's death, I started running the yard until I would almost fall out trying to forget and forgive, but it didn't do any good. There was a burning hate inside of me that no amount of running and training would relieve. I practiced punching on the big bag until I could hit with either hand with devastating effect. An old con I had become close to asked me one day why I trained so hard. After listening to me explain, he laughed. "Listen, Whoreson," he said, "you got too much on the ball, boy, to go out and resort to violence. If you're gonna be a player, you got to act like one. If Tony stole your woman, fighting him about it ain't the answer. Always remember this. What goes around comes around. You just wait and have patience. You'll get your chance to play on him. And when it comes, make sure you do it good and smooth." I listened to what he said, and acceptance came slow, but it came. Prison had taught me patience, and with calm endurance, I knew that one day my chance would come to fix Boots and Tony. Some of my bitterness vanished, so when they called my number to report to the front office for a visit, I hesitated for only a moment. Since I didn't have any kinfolks, it couldn't be anybody else but Tony. When Big Mama passed away, a lawyer came to inform me she had left $5,000 in his care for me, so there was no reason for him to come and see me again. Our business was finished until I was released. Leaving the gymnasium, I cut across the yard and reached the hall office. 30 minutes later, I was standing in the visiting room waiting for my visit. When the door opened, I recognized my visitor at once. It had been over 6 years since I'd seen her. Before, she had been a cute young girl. Now, she was a very attractive young lady. I opened my arms and she stepped into them as though it were the most natural act between us. When she tried to speak, I smothered her words with another kiss. I held her by the shoulders and looked down at her with genuine pleasure. "Janet, how good the gods have been to you. Surely you know you have become a creation of art," I said graciously. Her laughter was soft and gentle. "My Whoreson, what have they been teaching you in this place?" It was like the opening of a floodgate. Given the opportunity to talk to a female after 6 years, released a torrent of words. My vocabulary had become quite extraordinary from a boy from the slums because of my eagerness to read. I had just about read everything in the prison library, plus completely finished all of the courses in the prison school. For the past 2 years, I have been taking college courses, and it had become noticeable in my writing and speech. We stared at each other across the visiting table. "I'm really proud of you, Whoreson," she said. "You have got so big since you've been here." And then she smiled at me, and you never seen such a smile. "Why, your shoulders will make 2 of me." She was just about right. She wasn't exactly tiny, but she was a thin, small-built woman with delicate features, while her skin had a smooth texture that reminded one of a fine, dark mahogany. After I finally ran down, I looked at her in embarrassment. "Damn, Janet, here I've been telling you about my schoolwork and all that junk and haven't even complimented you on all the records you keep putting out. Why, I lie awake at night sometimes just to hear them play some of your songs." She smiled, pleased. "It ain't really nothing. We just been kinda lucky. We got a good songwriter and the breaks have been coming our way." She remained silent for a moment, then continued. "Tony asked me to give you a message for him," she said. Her eyes scanned my face for any sign of anger before she continued. "He said to tell you that he thought you was too much of a player not to recognize game when it went down, and that it was part of the dues that all players had to play." However disagreeable what she said may have been to me, I had no intention of allowing her to see that I was irritated. She studied my expression closely. To avoid an awkward situation, I began to give her a snow job with plenty of bullshit on top. "You know, Janet, have you ever stopped and tried to figure out why so many of us from our environment, boys that is, don't try to be anything else but parasites, pimps, and just plain dope fiends?" Her mouth was wide open now, and I knew I had her. She stared at me in wonder. I could see her brain racing a mile a minute. "Many people think we're sick," I continued, "but it's not really a sickness as I now see it. It is not the eccentricity of a single individual, but the sickness of the times themselves, the neuroses of our generation. Not because we are worthless individuals either, rather because we are products of the slums. Faced with poverty on one side, ignorance on the other, we exploit those who are nearest to us." Her eyes were big now. She was so enthused over my words that I wanted to reach over and feel her leg to see if she had had a climax. "Oh, Whoreson, this prison term has really done you good. I wouldn't have thought that I'd ever hear you talk like this. What you're saying really makes sense." This had been the first time I'd been able to try out my new vocabulary on anyone other than the cons or guards, and I could see what some of the other smarter prisoners had said was true. If you use good diction, you could con a bee out of honey. She was so naive that I couldn't help but amuse myself a little more. Yes, I do have a much broader outlook on life than I had when I entered this institution. But now, back to my original line of reasoning. Now, don't misunderstand me, Janet. This is not an attempt to disguise or to palliate this widespread sickness that pervades the black ghettos, but rather an attempt to try and understand why is it that so many of the youth of our generation have no higher goal in life than to be pimps. "Oh, Whoreson, I'm so proud of you." She hesitated for a moment, then went on. "When I first came to this visiting room, I had decided not to tell you something, but now after listening to you talk, I feel as if I could tell you without being frightened of what you'll say." The smile that I forced was fictitious. The last thing I wanted to do was smile. I had a premonition that whatever she had to say would remove the amiable mood between us and leave a breach that would be hard to repair. She hadn't seemed to notice because she announced, "You heard of the pop singer Johnny Ringo, haven't you?" I stared at her coldly. "You talking about the blue-eyed soul, the white boy with the #1 record out right now?" Her eyes lit up. Uh-huh, that's him. We haven't announced it yet, but we're supposed to be engaged and... She froze in mid-sentence. My stare was so chilling, it paralyzed her. There was a burning rage inside of me that defied description. I'd rather see you on your deathbed first, bitch. Whoreson, I didn't know you were prejudiced, she said in a shocked voice. Prejudice hell, bitch. Every time one of you black bitches get some kind of recognition with a little money to go with it, black men ain't good enough for you. Then you ask us why we want to pimp. That's all one of you funky bitches is good for, to be used. My voice dropped low, and it was full of scorn. And to think, bitch, that you had enough nerve to tell me once about finishing school so that I could be something. She started to speak, but I interrupted. Shut up! You once told me you wouldn't have a pimp. Well, dumb bitch, just what do you think you're getting engaged to? It's for goddamn sure he wouldn't look at your black ass if you didn't have all that money in the bank from your records. I continued, not giving her a chance to speak. I just wish it was possible I could see you when he took you home to introduce you to his people. They'd look at you like you just crawled out from under some rock. If it wasn't for your money, bitch, they'd probably ask you to empty the goddamn ashtrays. There were tears in her eyes as she stared at me. I thought you had changed, Whoreson, but I see a better education didn't really help you. You're still rotten underneath it all. I grabbed her arm and almost pulled her across the visiting table. Don't no black man want to see no black woman get played on, tramp. So if that's rotten, I'm rotten clean, though. With the back of my hand, I wiped my lips. I have 10 times more respect for a whore than what I have for you, tramp. At least they are getting paid when they associate with a peckerwood, but you, pig, you don't have any excuse. And to think that you had the audacity to offer your lips to me. Again, I wiped my lips with the back of my hand. Then I leaned across the table and spit in her face. I pushed back my chair and got up. The guard had seen my action and was bearing down on me. Get me out of here, Peckerwood, I growled at him. As I walked towards the door, I could hear her sobs behind me. Before I left the visiting room, the last sight I saw was Janet with her head down on the table, crying. For my behavior in the visiting room, I was given 7 days in the hole. Upon my release from the hole, I ran into my buddy, the old con. He shook his head in disgust. Man, oh man, he began. Whoreson, I don't really know what to say other than that you're a damn fool. The whole prison is talking about you. The brothers who were in the visiting room recognized Janet Wilson, boy, and they say you really spit in that girl's face. The bitch had it coming, I stated harshly. What do you think I should have did after the bitch told me she was going to marry a honky? Kiss her? He continued to shake his head at my ignorance. So what, fool? Do you think it helped your cause any by spitting in her face? He began to lecture me as though I were a child. First of all, the girl had to like you or she wouldn't have wasted her time coming up here. Second, ignorant ass nigga, the girl got big stuff. I mean big stuff. Her cash is so long that the whiteys are playing for it. So what do? Instead of smoothing her feelings out and talking her into changing her mind, you spit in her face like some damn kid. And to think I thought you might one day be a player. No wonder your partner stole your main woman. You ain't got no style about you. It occurred to me to knock him down, but in my heart, I knew what he was telling me was true. I gritted my teeth and listened. He studied me solemnly. Here, everybody in the prison is dreaming of the opportunity that presented itself to you. All they hoping for is the opportunity to just meet a woman in her position. And here you is, with one in love with you, and you don't know how to handle it. His scorn was blistering. The only reason I took an interest in you when you came into this prison was because me and your mama used to be good friends. But if I had known you was this much of a fool, I'd never have spoke to you. Anytime a nigga and a whitey are shooting at the same woman and she's black, the whitey has to have big money to win. In your case, sucker, the honky ain't got big stuff. He's just another poor-ass singer with one record out. For several moments, he remained silent. I stared at him, and suddenly it dawned on me that he was taking this personally. Looking at him from his viewpoint, I could understand his anger. For him, such a woman would be a precious possession, an opportunity of a lifetime. Naturally, he resented my blunder. To him, it seemed as if I were tossing away something he had searched for all his life without ever attaining. With me, it was different. I was 20 years younger than him, and I didn't have a doubt in my mind that I wouldn't get over big when I got out of prison. There wasn't any one bitch in the world that I felt I had to bend over backwards for. What the other niggas in the penitentiary thought about me didn't mean nothing. I was going home in less than 4 months. What they didn't realize was that the bitch got away lucky. If we had been anywhere else, I would have done much more than spit on her. I grinned. I began to picture myself peeing on top of her head. The old con scowled at me. I don't know what you find to grin about. I guess you think you done something cute. Well, you sure in the hell didn't, young-ass, bitch-ass mother. That's as far as he got. I caught him upside the head with a hard right hook, then put 2 sharp left hooks in his stomach. That folded him up. Before he could get himself together, I hit him on the chin with a straight right-hand shot that laid him out cold. For fighting in the yard, they put me in isolation until I was discharged. That was alright with me, cause I knew if they put me back in population, I was going to have a lot of trouble out of that con. He wouldn't forget that sneak punch I hit him with no time soon. And then to get knocked out by a younger con like me, even though I fought on the boxing squad, wouldn't make matters any easier. He would have to retaliate, or his name would become Pussy. That's the way it was in prison. Either a man fought and proved he was a man, or he played the passive role and got fucked. To lose a fight in prison didn't mean anything. To lose without fighting back spelled trouble. They had a saying in prison that all cons heard sooner or later. Fuck, fight, or wash clothes. If you wash clothes to get out of fighting, you would just about end up being fucked before the week was out. Sodomy rape was a way of life in the penitentiary, not something that occurred on occasion. If you were weak or showed fear, you became fair game for the dogs. What they couldn't do with fear, they would accomplish with force. That's how some of the prisons get a steady supply of punks. The dogs turn them out. By rape if necessary, by persuasion when possible. Is there any wonder then that when I left prison, I was more an animal than a man? My nickname while I was in prison shows more than words could do what kind of man I was becoming. Boss Dog. Chapter 19. My return to the free world was uneventful. No one really cared whether I came home or not. Big Mama was dead, and I didn't have anything in common with Tony since he plucked off my woman. In fact, I made it a point to stay out of their way. I didn't know how I would react if I ran up on Boots, so I kept my distance. The streets hadn't changed that much. There was a new group of young pimps hanging around on the corners, but besides that, it seemed as if the clock had stood still. My first stop had been at the bank where the lawyer had deposited my money. I withdrew it and made a beeline for the nearest Cadillac dealer. I put $4,000 down on a new Caddy with the promise to bring the other $2,800 on the date of delivery. Since I didn't have any credit, I had to pay cash, but it didn't make any difference. When I left prison, I had close to $3,000 in my account, and with the $5,000 Big Mama left me, I still had enough to get a few rags to wear. Tony had my jewelry, and I was on my way to get my diamonds from him without any static. I spoke to the car dealer. How about letting me use one of these old junks till my car is delivered? He shook his head. I don't think I could do that. If you had an accident or something, we'd be in one hell of a fix here. I pulled out my bankroll and peeled off a $50 bill. Do you think that will cover your problem until my car is delivered? He pocketed the bill and called one of the colored men working on the lot and had him put a dealer's plate on one of the older cars. I drove off the lot and headed downtown. After getting my license straightened out, I stopped at a clothing store and bought a few outfits. Dusk was just falling when I turned onto Hastings. Tony had moved all of his girls down to the lower end of the street because of his misunderstanding with Big Mama, and after her death, he was too settled where he was to move back to the neighborhood we had been raised in. Since I didn't know where he lived, I pulled up in front of 6 girls working in the doorway to inquire as to his whereabouts. 5 of them rushed up to the car. They all wore short skirts and their faces were heavily painted. "Hi, honey," the leader of the group yelled. "Which one of us do you want to see?" The leader was a large woman with an abundance of everything. You could look at her and see that she must have been cute before she allowed herself to gain so much weight. Now that she was going to fat, it was hard to discover anything attractive about her. But when she smiled, showing the tip of her tongue at the corner of her mouth, there was the promise of sweet sensuality and exorbitant delight. There hadn't been the slightest thought in my mind of playing stuff, but since she had hit on me, I decided to teach her a lesson. "Yeah, baby, why don't you sit down for a minute? Maybe you and me can reach some kind of agreement." She tossed a wicked look over her shoulder at her friends as though to tell them she had just pulled off a grand coup. Her attitude was one of authority. You could tell she was under the impression that she was the leader of the hen house. I drove around the corner and parked. "What's your name, honey?" I asked softly. "Most of my dates just call me Ruby, sweetie." Appearances could really be deceiving. This bitch actually thought I was a mark. "I want to talk to you for a few moments, Ruby," I said while pulling my huge bankroll out. I scanned through the money for a second, then found a $10 bill and put it in her lap. Her eyes had got as big as dinner plates at the sight of my bankroll. "Sure, sweetie, as long as you got the price, I got the time," she capped, trying to control the greed in her voice. Assuming an air of embarrassment, I put the little game into action. "Ruby, I don't know how to ask you this, but I want you to teach me how to pimp." That really caught the bitch unprepared. She stared at me with her eyes wide and her mouth flopping like a caught fish. I continued before she had time to speak. "What I mean is, I'll pay you to show me how to dress like a pimp, act like one, and really carry myself like one." I rushed on. "You ain't got to worry about getting paid, 'cause my daddy died and left me $25,000. I'm going to buy me a Cadillac as soon as I get the rest of the money." I pulled the bankroll back out. "As you can see, I got $5,000 of it now." I flashed 6 $100 bills at her. Beyond a doubt, the bitch was hooked. She just stared at me, dumbfounded. "You don't think you'll have any difficulty teaching me what I want to know, do you, Ruby?" She shook her head. "Ain't no trouble in teaching you, but I mean, you ain't bullshitting about this, are you? This ain't some kind of joke you call yourself having on me, is it?" "Is that money in your lap a joke?" I asked. Again, she shook her head. "You mean you don't want to go to no hotel or anything like that?" "Absolutely not, young lady. Pimps don't go to bed with a woman the first time they meet her, do they?" For a minute, I began to think I was laying it on a little thick. She stared at me as though I was losing my goddamn mind. That's right, honey. You don't want to go to bed with me if you want to be a pimp. They don't hop in and out of bed with every woman they meet the way a square would do. It hadn't taken her long to catch on to the way the trend was going. She rumbled around in her pocketbook and came out with a pencil and small notebook. She had come to the conclusion that I was some kind of nut and decided to play on me for the $10 bill I had given her. I didn't want her to give me the wrong number, so I aroused her greed. Peeling off a $5 bill, I put it in her lap. You make sure I can get in touch with you now, Ruby, because I want you to help me pick out my Cadillac and clothes. Plus, I'm going to pay you real well when I get the rest of my money sometime this month. The thought of playing me out of that money had become so exciting to her, she could hardly breathe. When she tried to speak, her words came out in blurts. Her features lacked any compassion. To her, I was the once-in-a-lifetime trick. I stared at her in amusement. This big, out-of-shape, cow-like bitch really believed she would end up beating me out of some money. After I took the address she had written out, she staggered away from the car as though she was drunk. At no time during our conversation had she even asked for my name. I pulled away from the curb full of confidence. This was one bitch that was getting ready to get faked completely out of her whore boots. Now my immediate problem was to find Tony so I could get my diamonds. I drove slowly back up Hastings, examining various faces in the late model cars I passed. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, unless it was even more decrepit than before I left. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel as if I was coming home. I could look at the sores of poverty and truly understand the meaning of slum life. The filthy streets, the wineheads sitting in doorways, the horrible shacks some unfortunate souls called home. I realized that there had to be something better in life for me. On the opposite corner, I saw a blood-red Cadillac parked at the curb. I pulled over and found the parking place. I had got the wire in prison that Tony owned a red caddy, and I didn't think there were that many red caddies on this side of town. I stopped in 2 restaurants first, without any luck, then crossed the street and entered Ed's bar. Just about the first thing I saw was Tony sitting at a table with 2 white girls. He saw me and waved a hand in my direction. I walked slowly over to his table. Whoreson, I heard you was out, baby. How come you didn't look me up so I could give you a coming home party? The people in the bar had become silent as students in a deaf and dumb school. I stared around at some of the familiar faces. Whores sat on bar stools staring at us curiously, while behind the bar, the white owner watched us closely for trouble. The cracked bar mirror revealed alcohol-flushed faces waiting in anticipation. I stared coldly at Tony. The only thing I want you to give me, nigga, is what you got that belongs to me. For a moment, he didn't quite understand what I was talking about. He stared around undecided for a second, then his face brightened. Oh yeah, you mean your jewelry, don't you? His voice had taken on a chilling note. His 2 girls stared at us with frightened eyes. There was no doubt about it. If I pushed it, Tony wouldn't back up an inch. He would meet me on any terms I wanted. I knew in my heart that all I had to do was pull up a chair and we would resume our friendship as though nothing happened. I wanted to for a fact, but something inside me wouldn't allow me to bend and grasp the outstretched hand of friendship. Again, he tried to bridge the gap between us. Removing my watch from his arm, he spoke quietly. Dig, Whoreson. Ain't no whore in the world worth the friendship between 2 men. He slid the watch across the table towards me. If you think I'm bullshitting, take this. I've had these 2 whores with me for the last 2 days looking for you. These are 2 of the best whores in my stable, Whoreson, and you can have either one of them you want. She's yours, man. I'll send her clothes over to your joint if you'll just say the word. Plus, you can take her on with you. Both women started to complain, but he silenced them immediately. He removed my ring and shoved it across the table at me. I stared at the women. One was a blonde, while the other one had dyed her hair bright red. Both were still in their early 20s. From his point of view, he probably thought he was offering me a damn good substitute for boots. But when I looked at the two pale-faced white girls, I knew that neither of them could ever take the place of the Black Queen he had taken from me. I shook my head, rejecting the offer. Even if he had offered boots, I would have turned it down. What goes around comes around, Tony, I said, slipping my ring on. I just hope you can recognize game when it comes your way. He sighed, deep and slowly. My open refusal of his offer had hurt him. One of his white girls, the blonde, had been watching me closely. She gave me the impression that if I had chosen her, she wouldn't have objected to the trade. I turned on my heel and walked away. I hadn't had a woman since I'd been home, and it had been well over 6 years since I'd slept with one, so I didn't want my weakness to show. The women he had offered were very beautiful, not tramps. It wasn't hard to believe him when he said they were the best of his stable. My conscience was starting to act up. Should I have accepted his offer of renewing our friendship? I couldn't see where it benefited me to ruin our relationship, but my pride had been hurt. I meant to repay Tony for what he had done. Whether I was right or wrong, some way, somehow, the day would come when he would experience payback. As I crossed the street, I could hear the sound of high-heeled shoes running behind me. When I got to the car door, she caught up with me. I looked over my shoulder at the fine blonde. She smiled up at me. She was small with large legs. Her skin was smooth, milky white with no blemishes. Hi, honey. I hope you don't mind me following you. It was my idea, not Tony's. I didn't appreciate the way you rejected me in the damn bar, so I asked Tony if it would be alright if I came out here with you. That's all you wanted to do? I asked coldly. Is come out here in the street and watch me drive away? Her laughter rang out merrily. She was the first woman I had heard laugh in quite a while. The sound was more pleasing than I could have ever anticipated. After a man has been locked up for a long time, he will appreciate the small things a woman does, things that he probably wouldn't have noticed before. No, Whoreson, I want to do a little more than just watch you drive away, but it's your decision. It was too much temptation. She was too attractive for me just to walk away from. I held the car door open. She climbed in from the driver's side and her skirt rose up above her thighs as she slid across the seat. Words would fail me if I tried to explain how I gaped at those big, pretty thighs. How can I describe how a man feels after being away from something so long to have it laid out on a platter for him? My first stop after pulling away from the curb was the drugstore. After purchasing a fifth of whiskey, my next stop was the motel I had been staying at. We undressed slowly, sipping on the whiskey and smoking up some reefer I had stashed around the room. Whether or not it was the alcohol, I don't know, but as we drank, I began to turn mean. She had told me her name was Anne, but the more I drank, the more I began to call her Jerry. At the beginning, I hadn't meant to abuse her. Each drink I took convinced me that it was my right to dog her. After we had had relations, a brutal idea began to grow in my mind. She lay there beside me, nude, on her stomach. I rolled over on top of her and started to squirm. Not too soon, Whoreson. Damn, you'll wear me out at this pace. Shut up, bitch, I said. I'm getting ready to teach you something new. Uh-huh, she said. Ain't nothing new about doing it like that, and it hurts besides. She began to try and squirm from under me, but I had all my weight on top of her, and she was still on her stomach. Using my feet, I put them between her legs and began to spread them open. Hastily, I fumbled around until I got the spot I wanted. With my finger as a guide, I pushed deeply into her rectum. Her scream shattered the stillness of the room, but it didn't interfere with the act of violence I was committing on her body. Taking the towel from off the backboard of the bed, I wrapped it around her head, covering her mouth, then continued to force my desire on her helpless body. She cried and moaned, but the towel muffled her attempts to call for help. With each succeeding lawless act I forced on her, I moved that much closer to the edge of madness. For the next 3 days, I kept her with me, not allowing her out of my sight. The only place she went was to the toilet, then back to bed. When we got hungry, I called out and had food delivered. Whenever someone knocked on the door, I made her go into the shower and turn the water on. At times when I was raping her, I could hardly recognize my own voice, cursing and muttering incoherently. On a rare occasion, I would commit a normal act of intercourse with her, but my preference was for the abnormal. When the morning came that I grew tired of her, or rather returned to sanity, she was a poor specimen of the opposite sex. Her face was tear-stained from constant crying, while her body was a mess of blue bruises. Discoloration had set in around her nipples from my treatment. When she realized that I was really going to let her go, she jumped into her clothes. She waited until she was standing in the doorway before speaking. "You dirty son of a bitch," she snarled. "You ain't no man. You're an animal, and a dog at that, you bastard, you." There was nothing attractive about her face now. Fatigue and hate had distorted her features into a mask of hatred. Without makeup, there was nothing left of the cute blonde I had entered the motel with. Her face was a blueprint of hell. My booming laughter beat at her in the empty doorway. "When you see your man, bitch, tell him my only regret is that it was you I fucked in the ass instead of him. Tell him not to worry though, 'cause he got his coming." Before she could slam the door, I added, "Don't go away, mad bitch. Just go away." She slammed the door so hard, I thought for a moment the glass would break. After that, the room became silent as a tomb. I found my wallet and pulled out Ruby's phone number. Here was another smart bitch that had one hell of a sunrise coming her way. Chapter 20. The phone by the side of the bed began to ring. I rolled over and sat up slowly. My head was throbbing from too much liquor and too many pills. Those red devils I had been taking gave me violent headaches the following morning. For a brief moment, I held my head between my hands, then glanced around for my temporary bed partner. The bed was empty. She had departed sometime that morning without my knowledge. Damn, I swore. It was no surprise she was gone. I began to remember flashes of my behavior. No wonder she had left the first opportunity she got. I was beginning to develop an obsession. Some people were hooked on drugs. Others had alcohol to worry about. My problem was starting to be an obsession to commit sodomy. I knew I had developed the desire while spending those 6 celibate years in prison without a woman, but it was one problem I was going to have to overcome. The shrill ringing of the telephone ended my brief attempt to analyze my strange preference. "Hi, Ruby," I said into the receiver. "No, woman, I wasn't lying when I told you today was the day to pick up my Cadillac." "What? I was supposed to call you at 2 o'clock? What time is it now?" "Damn, Ruby. I just overslept. I'll pick you up on the corner of Hancock and Woodward. Give me about 20 minutes to get dressed." As an afterthought, I added, "Don't forget, I'm going to take you downtown and get you a hell of a new coat today." I hung up, then took a quick shower. After that, I proceeded to dress with leisure. I knew she would be waiting because she thought she had a genuine trick in me. Well, today would be the day of enlightenment for her. My attire was immaculate. A cold black silk mohair suit with white-on-white long-collared dress shirt and pure silk midnight black tie. I slipped my jewelry on and stared in the mirror. A man's face stared back at me now, not the features of a boy. Golden complexion, not one gained by lying in the sun, but one of nature's gifts, topped off with coal black eyes and jet black hair. A mischievous smile came to my lips, but not to my eyes, when I thought about the game getting ready to go off. Ruby's pimp didn't know it, but he was getting ready to be played right out of a good whore. When I slowed my car down at the corner of Hancock, she was standing right on the corner, waiting impatiently. "I didn't mean to inconvenience you, Ruby," I said when she got in the car, "but I had one hell of a party last night and just couldn't get up." She was studying me closely. "That's all right, Billy," she said. It had been over 3 weeks since I met her, and she still hadn't found out what my real name is. Well, today would be the end of all that. Before tomorrow this time, she would have a new outlook on life, and also a new program to work out of. All that damn fat she was carrying around wouldn't be on her a month from now either, I thought ruthlessly. I put her at wearing a size 16 dress, and that was giving her the benefit of the doubt. Our short journey quickly came to an end as I drove up to the car dealer's lot. It didn't take long to complete our transaction. When I paid the dealer the rest of his money, Ruby's eyes almost popped out at the sight of my large roll. One of the porters drove my new Cadillac up, powder blue with a white convertible top and sky blue upholstery. Whatever doubts she may have had harbored in the back of her mind were gone as we settled back against the luxurious seats on our way downtown. "Billy, this is really a beautiful car," she said for the 10th time as we drove slowly on, accompanied by the murmur of soft music. I parked in front of Detroit's finest furrier. As I entered the store, Ruby was right on my heels, staring around in fascination. Up until this moment, I don't think she ever really believed I was going to buy her a coat, let alone a fur. I sat back in a large, soft chair while she tried on a dozen different furs. At last, she found a mink stole she liked and brought it over for me to look at. I nodded in agreement and stood up. "Will this be enough to put in your layaway?" I asked the sales lady, removing 3 $100 bills from my pocket. The saleswoman took the money and made out a slip for me. When we left the store, Ruby's eyes were shining, and she had a tight grip on my arm. She had been played on just that quick. My next stop was at my motel. She took her clothes off quickly while I stared at the abundance of fat hanging from her sides. Her belly protruded grotesquely. I made love to her slowly, indifferently. Her obesity had killed any desire I had. Now, it was just a matter of satisfying her. She moaned and groaned under me until I felt her reach her climax. Then I pretended to reach mine. Hastily, I rolled over on my side of the bed. "You know what I want you to do now, don't you, Ruby?" "What you want me to do, Billy?" she asked innocently. For one moment, I was about to send her on her way and forget about playing on her, but I needed a whore, and since I started to play on her, I decided to see it on out. "Take this money and go back to your apartment and get your clothes. I need a whore now, not a girlfriend." She stared at me in surprise. It seemed for a minute that she wouldn't go for it, but her greed got the better of her. She stared at my big roll lying on the dresser and at the $5 bill I had pulled off of it. "Sure, Billy," she said and started to get dressed. "I won't be long. You'll be here when I get back, won't you?" I didn't bother to answer. I just lit a cigarette and watched her squirm as she tried to wriggle all that fat down into her tight dress. It was a sight to behold, and I watched her curiously, wondering if she would make it or not. After she left, I waited 5 minutes, then rushed back downtown and got a refund from the furrier. The saleswoman didn't like it. In fact, she called the manager, but after fat-mouthing for a while, he returned my money. I drove back to the motel thoughtfully. It was going just like I planned, except I hadn't realized she was that fat. Well, there was one remedy for that. She would just have to lose the extra weight, and I was going to see she lost it damn fast. When Ruby returned carrying her suitcases, I was ready for her. "Oh, Billy," she said, "you should have heard my ex-pimp yell when I started to pack my bags. He swore he couldn't live without me." I stared at her coldly. "He should have did more than just run his mouth," I said harshly. My words only amused her. "Shit," she said fiercely. "If that nigga had tried to do something to me, you had to have called an ambulance for him." Her attitude towards her last pimp was no news to me. It was common knowledge up on the track that her pimp had been scared of her. She had a reputation for being quick and good with a knife and had been known to cut a few people of both sexes. "But you ain't gotta worry about nothing, Billy, honey. I like you, and I know with all that money you got, we ain't gonna have no problem at all getting along." I waited until she had finished speaking before coming off the bed in one smooth motion. The way a man started off pimping a whore was generally the way he ended up. If you didn't make a whore realize that you were the man, she'd end up in the driver's seat, while you'd be more of a bitch in her eyes than a man. My fist landed upside her head in one solid thump. She fell up against the dresser, then slid to the floor cursing. "You son of a bitch, don't no bastard hit me like that!" She came up off the floor, eyes blazing. When she made her move, it wasn't fast. It was unchained lightning. Her hand dipped down inside her bra in a blur of motion. Before I could move, she had popped the button and a long blade shot out the end of her knife. For a woman her size, she moved with blinding speed. She came in towards me, not in a stabbing stance, but with the knife held low so she could gut me with one vicious swing. Without hesitating, she stepped in and swung the blade upward. It was the moment I had been waiting for. I turned sideways and chopped down with the side of my hand, catching her wrist with a solid blow. The knife fell to the floor, and before she could stoop to reach it, I slammed a brutal combination of blows to her head. I have to give credit where credit is due. She didn't go down. She hit the wall and came right back up at me with her nails. She was swinging her arms like a windmill. I went under her wild swings and stuck a left and a right to her stomach as hard as I could. She folded up like a big bag. Grabbing her hair, I pulled her to me. With slow deliberation, I ripped her dress off. When she was down to her panties and bra, I grabbed the front of the bra and snatched it so hard that it popped loose in the back. Tossing her on the bed, I began to pull her panties down around her legs. When she raised up, I backhanded her in the mouth. When I got her pants off one leg, she opened her legs wide and stared up at me. Her eyes were full of scorn as she coldly revealed herself to me. But I had one hell of a surprise for her. Cunt was the last thing in my mind. I moved to the head of the bed and reached under the pillow. When my hand came out, it was holding my pimp sticks, 2 coat hangers twisted together. She lay as though paralyzed, her eyes getting big with fear. "Bitch," I said coldly, "there's a few things you got to know and you got to learn. The first one is that my name ain't Billy. It's Whoreson, if that means anything to you. The second thing you should know, bitch, is that you can't teach me nothing about pimping, whore. I was born to pimp. Now, we'll start with the things you got to learn. And first on the program is respect. A good whore always has respect for her man, and you definitely are going to be a good whore." Before the words were out of my mouth, I had lit into her with the coat hangers. Her screams fell on deaf ears as I continued to beat her. She fell off the bed and tried to squirm under it. I grabbed her leg and pulled her out to the middle of the floor and continued to beat her. When I got tired, I took her in the bathroom and made her take a bath, then snatched her out of the tub and beat her again. I beat her until her voice became hoarse, then tossed her on the bed and stuck my Jones in her big white butt. Later that same evening, I took her down on the track. When I saw her standing in the doorway talking to two other girls, I walked over and knocked her down. She stared up at me from the ground. There was stark fear in her eyes, and when I saw that, I knew half my battle was won. Now, all I had to do was stop her from stabbing me while I slept. This problem I went to work on at once. I ran down the pill man and bought out his supply of beans. I made her stand in the corner and work for 3 days and 3 nights without a drop of sleep. I kept her full of beans and black coffee. The morning I pulled her up and took her home to sleep, she was out on her feet. She walked into the side of the motel, mistaking it for the door. I kept Ruby going at this pace for 1 month. In that time, she came down from a size 16 dress to a size 12. When I saw her with her clothes off, now there was nothing repulsive about the sight. She had always been tall, now she was graceful too. Her skin was smooth, and her face had always been cute. Now, with the loss of her double chin, she had turned into an attractive young woman. I still took her up on the school grounds some mornings and made her run till she became exhausted. Whether or not she disliked the treatment I put her through, she was proud of the end results. I constantly caught her looking in the mirror, smiling at herself. We sat in the motel sipping wine. You know, Whoreson, if you didn't get mad so quick and beat me so hard, I'd really like you. She rushed on before I could speak. I mean, I like you now, honey, but if you just wouldn't fight me so much, I'd be so happy. I ain't never had no man like you before, and it just takes a little time for me to get used to your ways. I stared at her coldly. Bitch, if I treated you any different, you would end up trying to put shit on me. This way, whore. You know if I catch you putting your funky little game on me, you know beyond a shadow of a doubt, I'll break both your fucking legs. She tried to fight back the sleep that was tugging at her. Her head dropped down to her chest, but she jerked it up. You know, Whoreson, she said in a drowsy voice, if you was a little more kinder, a whole lot of the girls on the corner would choose you. She added, they see how hard you work me and it scares them, 'cause don't nobody's pimp work them the way you work me. Ruby, stand up and take off all your clothes. She jumped at my command as though I had kicked her. Her eyes got large and she stood up hesitantly. Her voice shook with fear. Whoreson, I didn't mean any harm, she said, pulling off her clothes. Her hands trembled as she pushed her panties down and stepped out of them. I beckoned to her. Come on over here. I ran my hands over her smooth body. There were still a few flabby spots, but on the whole, she was becoming one beautiful brown-skinned girl. Quit all that shaking, Ruby, I said softly as my hands traveled up and down her body. She was trembling like a frightened doe. Under my smooth caresses, she slowly quieted down. I pulled her onto my lap. Gently, I ran my fingers in and out between her legs. She emitted a low moan and lay back against me. I picked her up in my arms and carried her over to the mirror and stood her up. What you see in the mirror, bitch, I stated coldly, is my creation. Not something you did for yourself, but what I had to force you to do for yourself. I continued. So from now on, when some bitch comes up to you and begins crying on your shoulder about how hard I work you laugh in her face, bitch, 'cause I ain't did nothing that didn't need doing. I wasn't complaining, Whoreson. My sarcastic laughter rang out in the small confines of the room. I know you wasn't, Ruby. You was just building up to trying to get around what I told you. You don't think, woman. I do your thinking for you. 'Cause whenever you try, something's bound to end up getting fucked up. Now ain't that right? She grinned at me shyly, then nodded her head in agreement. Whatever you say, Daddy. You know I'll do whatever you want me to. With a smooth motion, I stood up and picked her up in my arms. Her nude body went tense in my embrace as I carried her over to the bed and laid her down. With slow deliberation, I ran my tongue up and down her golden brown body. I could feel her muscles tighten unconsciously as I began gently to make love to her. The more elaborate pains I took, the more excited she became. Soon, Ruby was moaning as she began to feel thrills I had never before taken the time to arouse in her. We reached the end of this portion of the miniseries on this edition of Ralph Reads. I would like to thank you, queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. You may connect with me on Twitter and Instagram as well as Periscope at RGMC2407. Use the Zelle app or drop me an email at rgmc2407@gmail.com. If you would like to leave me a small donation, please do so at Zelle or at paypal.me/RGMC2407 or the Cash App. My cash tag is RGMC2407. You may also find me on my very own channel, RGMC, Ralph Garcia, Master of Ceremonies, as well as right here at home on the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you, and I love you like cooked food. I will see you folks on the continuation of Donald Goines' miniseries on the next edition of Ralph Reads. Sayonara.